I'm debating like how much stock I actually want to buy. Like in my mind, I can buy stocks or I can buy Bitcoin. Those are kind of my two longer term things. Bonds are interesting for trades, maybe if you're trying to bet on the actual Armageddon coming that's going to ultimately force like Jay Powell's hand. But for long term, obviously, we don't want to own bonds. How are you thinking about stocks versus Bitcoin right now?
With those two assets, I like both. I mean, I like sort of like stocks that create cash flows over a long period of time. I like that, the compounders. And I like Bitcoin, of course. I'm just like a little wary of like taking that game further where you just try to get more beta, because like as you step further out on the risk curve, there's less certainty. I think like you could say, well, if you want to buy Bitcoin, why not start buying Fartcoin? Or, you can just take that out forever. And that is not appealing to me. But stocks versus Bitcoin, I'm interested in both.
I'm a lot more interested in Bitcoin. I think that stocks like there's a lot of like path dependency here for stocks. There's a lot of variables that could go one way or another that could make stocks kind of a screaming buy, or not. It also feels like stocks and Bitcoin are sort of at like different stages of their kind of generational cycles. Like I feel in some sense that stocks are at like maybe they're potentially at the end of like an era, because it does seem that the Trump admin is very serious about leveling out the economy, basically rectifying the gigantic difference in gains over the last decade or two in labor versus capital, right?
Yeah.
It seemed very labor focused. And a huge chunk of Trump's base doesn't own stocks. They don't care if the stock market goes down. They want their wages to go up and they want to be able to afford housing, right? Those are kind of like mega huge things for them. And a lot of people are like, well, these tariffs, they're going to make goods more expensive and they're going to be mad, but how much will the prices go up? And then like, how much do you care about those prices going up? Like, did your wages go up? Did like more jobs come into your hometown? Is a house 50% cheaper than it was before, right? Because that would rectify like a whole lot of stuff, right? So do we eliminate income tax for you under 150K? So many different variables like swimming around, and it seems like everybody right now is basically just like a armchair tariff expert on Twitter, right? And there's just this overwhelming consensus, right? Overwhelming consensus that everything being done is really bad, right? I don't know about the circles you run in, but in the circles I run in, like there's not a lot of people like who think that what the Trump admin is doing is like economically a good idea. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Yeah. So as like a trader, like my antenna always like perk up when I just like everybody is on one side of the boat. It kind of reminds me of late 2022, right before we started basically ripping.
Right, you were sort of one of the first bulls in that case, just sort of taking the other side.
It's just like everybody was bearish. Everybody was just pounding macro podcasts and shorting everything. And at a certain point, positioning matters. What's priced in matters. Markets price things in. You have to be thinking about whether this is, at least in the short term, overblown. And I do think in the short term it probably is. And I think there's a pretty high chance of like a pretty large tradable bounce in the short run here.
I want to point out something though. Like, so you're looking at stocks, and I agree that I think I heard Scott Bessent say something to the effect of like, we don't care about Wall Street, we care about helping Main Street or something. And
it's a Mag 7 problem, not a MAGA problem. I think
that was awesome.
Really gangster quote.
Pretty awesome quote. I mean, it's not awesome for me as a stock investor, but
yeah,
like what I go back to all the time is like, stocks to me aren't just like this market trading vehicle. It's like stocks represent businesses. And like when you think about businesses there are good businesses that sell widgets that people want, and people are going to continue to want the widgets and services from these great businesses, I feel okay buying the stocks of great businesses. I think, like, can the multiples compress more? Sure. But I think the businesses, like the fundamentals of the businesses, are going to be fine, of the good ones. And it's like my job to pick the good ones, to find the good ones that are going to have sustainable cash flows.
Do you have a strong opinion on why the Trump admin is doing, what their end goal actually is?
Besson, I think we were talking about the same interview, one with Tucker Carlson. He kind of mentioned 3 points. And the third one I found most interesting, that he was saying that we want to move people out of the public sector towards the private sector, and then we want to re-lever the private sector. And I found that interesting because I feel like, moving people out of the public sector is going to decrease our spending. Like, we want to decrease the government deficit and government debt level, and moving people into private jobs and helping companies, like, by decreasing interest rates and helping companies like invest in infrastructure again. I feel like that seems like their agenda, but there also seems to be like maybe a fourth dimension of the chess game that I'm not seeing. It's probably like related to this like Cold War with China.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the China element is a very underrated element of what's going on, probably. I'm not smart enough to understand all of the moving pieces here, because there are so many moving pieces, right? We have the trade imbalances, whether you think those are serious or not, manufactured in the US versus not. We have the debt refinancing situation. We have the deficit. We have like all of these little things interacting. We have energy policy. We got foreign wars. We've got obviously a geopolitical conflict with China. There's so many moving pieces, right?